Local news stations across the country have been reporting the same story the past few weeks.
By fireworks.
Firing off a firework.
Hearing loud booms at night.
Their normally quiet blocks sound more like battlefields.
It's a mystery buried under the flood of never-ending news, but it's managed to capture the imaginations of people regardless. Who's behind those damn fireworks? Let's go over the facts. Every year in the weeks leading up to July 4th, complaints about illegal fireworks skyrocket, but this year is different. Police stations and municipalities across the country are reporting that the fireworks craze has started earlier in June, and the volume of complaints has increased by multiples of 1,000. Firework retailers are reporting a boom in consumer fireworks sales, with some chains seeing a 400% increase in sales. But these are consumer-grade fireworks, not the kind you'd see at a fireworks show, and definitely not the kind people have been complaining about. Whoa. Because of the pandemic, fireworks shows across the country have been canceled, leaving a bunch of supply with nowhere to go. Despite the American Pyrotechnics Association denying claims of a professional firework black market, it's not a stretch to believe that some suppliers are illegally offloading their supplies to recoup their losses. So this partly explains why complaints are up. There's just way more supply out there. But we're likely noticing it more because cities have gotten a lot quieter. The New York Times conducted multiple microphone tests and confirmed that, at least in New York, urban street noise is down. And with everyone staying at home, this has created the perfect condition for a national public nuisance epidemic. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. But no, that's not the whole story now, is it? A Twitter thread from writer Robert Jones Jr. recently went viral where he described the theory that the fireworks are actually a police Psy-Op meant to destabilize BLM. He goes on to write that the operation likely has two goals: to cause sleep deprivation, to quote-unquote create confusion and stoke tensions, and to desensitize us as a means to get us so used to the sound of firecrackers that when they start using their real artillery on us, we won't know the difference. It's meant to sound like a war zone because a war zone is what it's about to become. Before we read the thread, my girlfriend had come up with a similar theory: crack some fireworks in black and brown neighborhoods, stoke tensions, and create the conditions to undermine the movement to defund the police. After all, if there's a persistent public nuisance, you need the cops to take care of it, right? It's an alluring and terrifying theory, and it reveals an inherent flaw in our understanding. How do you know what's happening as it's happening? There are no research papers on current events or scientific studies. Instead, knowledge is passed down orally or digitally through the community. Skeptical people might call this rumor mongering or gossiping, but most truth starts off as local community knowledge. If you had told someone at the time that you thought the FBI was sending threatening letters to Martin Luther King Jr. or that they were taking out black leaders, depending on who you'd ask, they'd probably think you're crazy. At the time, these were baseless conspiracies with absolutely no evidence. The only pieces of evidence available were the accounts of people that mainstream media would never take seriously. When the FBI, for example, raided Fred Hampton's apartment and executed him in his sleep, the police report showed that the Panthers were the one to instigate the shootout. The squad who invaded the home was commended by the media for their bravery and their restraint, despite shooting nearly 100 rounds into the apartment. People involved in the civil rights movement knew exactly what was happening. They had seen the events firsthand, or they had heard stories of police infiltration, but it wasn't until the FBI was raided by radicals and their secret files stolen and made public that the knowledge of the community was given authority by the institutions of the country. We've seen a similar dynamic since the Ferguson uprising in 2014. 6 people connected to the protests have passed away, sometimes in strange and unusually violent ways. Reverend Darrell Gray, a prominent black leader, has received anonymous threats, like when he was sent a 6-foot python in an unmarked box. Meanwhile, police say there is no evidence of foul play in any of their deaths. While online outlets run stories about how their deaths are mysterious, they don't take a stance either way, and mainstream media avoid the topic altogether. Activists on the ground report being harassed, stalked, and terrorized by police, but the idea that there's a concerted effort targeting activists is still regarded as conspiracy. The unfortunate reality is that we just can't know exactly what's going on. Wider, more well-off audiences probably lean towards the more mainstream explanation because it's the safe explanation. It relies on ideas like supply and demand that are known variables. But we can't forget that just like the law of supply and demand, believing the more conspiratorial explanation isn't wrong or illogical. I'd argue it's just as logical. An institution that's facing its potential demise, organizing a counter-campaign to make themselves seem useful, or at the least not enforcing public nuisance laws as strongly because of the defund campaign, is as natural a series of events as the law of supply and demand, especially when you consider the internal politics of police departments. This is exactly the kind of thing I'd expect to see in some dossier on police misconduct a few years in the future. Media sources and fact-checkers will rush to deny any claims of wrongdoing by the police, but there's just no way of knowing. Are the fireworks just inner-city ruffians blowing off steam, corrupt cops terrorizing black and brown neighborhoods, or is it just a glut of supply making its way downstream? The likely and boring answer is that it's probably a mix of both. We just won't know how much of which theory is righter until there's time to investigate the claims. So the only question left is, what do we do about the problem? Well, we definitely know what not to do.
We heard from Mayor de Blasio just a short time ago, and with a rise in complaints over fireworks being discharged in the city, the mayor is promising to crack down on their use. He is putting together a task force.
New York City just announced their plan to crack down on the late night light shows. The city will dedicate a law enforcement task force focused on disrupting the supply of fireworks, including sting operations. War on drugs? Psh, try the war on fireworks. Amidst the defund the police movement, New York has strengthened the role of the police and will now take DEA-style enforcement to tackle fireworks. The likely result is that more people will be sent to jail, more people will enter the criminal justice system, and worst of all, more people might be killed by the police. This is unacceptable. So here's an alternative solution. Fireworks are a community problem, one that doesn't need armed thugs to break down doors to solve it. Find like-minded people in your community, talk to them about the problem, pinpoint where they're coming from. Hell, patrol the streets if you have to. Because regardless of why this is happening, if the community doesn't mobilize to police itself, the actual police are going to come to take charge on the issue. They'll get more funding from the city council and the war on fireworks, and the spokes of the criminal industrial complex will continue to turn. And that's a solution we just cannot afford.